one of the things that there's many things social media has done. Social media is really taking over, and so I know most of you are on Facebook, and some of you are on Instagram, and all sorts of things. And we present our best selves. We filter things, and we take 40 selfies just to get the right angle, and you know, and you take a photo and you go, no. And there's an app called Facetune, by the way, that you can do all sorts of wonderful things with. You can get rid of your wrinkles. It can make your face thinner. It can whiten your teeth. It can do all sorts of things. It can make your face darker. I used it this week and it didn't. It stuck. But part of the problem with social media is that we do show our best selves. We present the image that we want the world to see. And I don't know if you've ever had any people that you've known like this, or any friends, where you look at their social media highlights and their pictures and they seem to be like the most perfect couple. Becky and I had friends, not close friends, but a couple that we knew a number of years ago, and every photo they just looked perfect. And they went on holidays, and you kind of wondered, did they actually ever do anything apart from take photographs? Because it just was like 200 photographs from a week in Spain, and how do you get the time? And always they were kind of wearing matching white hoodies, and you know, and everything was just, and lovely white teeth, and everything was just so perfect, and talking about gushing all over each other, you know, saying, oh, I love this guy so much, and I thank God every day for bringing this girl into my world, and together forever hashtag, and all this stuff. And then a year later they were getting divorced. True story, and they're divorced now. And you kind of wonder what the hidden issues were. What was going on underneath the surface? What was going on underneath the facade? Or maybe it's someone you know and they're really devout, they're really respectable, they're involved in their church, they are preaching maybe, or they're a deacon or an elder, and they're very black and white, and they know their Bible back to front, and they're a pillar of the community, and they're living a secret life. You find out that they have been stealing money, or having an affair, or been involved in some sort of immoral behavior, and you never would have thought it, and you think to yourself, what were the hidden issues going on there? What was going on beneath the surface? Maybe you know someone who seems to have it all. They just seem to have the perfect life, great job, great family, great car. Everything just seems to fall into place for them. They're good looking, and then suddenly they die of a disease that they've been battling secretly for years but never told anybody. And you wonder what it was like living with that hidden issue. That's what we're going to think about a wee bit this morning. Just those hidden issues, because we all have them. We all do that. We all cover up certain imperfections in our lives. We all wear a mask even when it's not Halloween. We all have these ways of presenting ourselves to the world that we want to manage our image and create a perception because we want people to see us in a certain way. And depending on your title, your job, your role, that can be important. If you're a boss, if you're a manager, if you're a business person, if you're a pastor, you have to present yourself, because there is an expectation. When people say a certain title, there's an expectation. We have business owners in here. We have school principals in here. We have kids workers in here. And there is an expectation of what you will do in that box that people fit you in. And so we have to manage that expectation. But reality is we all have hidden issues. There's some parts of our life that we don't want out there for public consumption. And that's exactly what we find with a character called Naaman that we're going to look at this morning. Naaman in 2 Kings chapter 5. Let's read the first verse. Now Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. God does things not by us, he does things through us. He was a valiant soldier Let's leave it there. He was a valiant soldier. Naaman had it all. He had risen to the peak and pinnacle of success in that society. He was brave, he was courageous, he was confident, he was a man of valor, he was respected. When he walked down the street, women batted their eyes at him. They couldn't get enough of this big hunk who had proven himself to be victorious in battle. Men admired him. Kids said, when I grow up, I want to be like him. They painted murals on him on the side of walls and housing estates. He was the man. Naaman was large and in charge. He was successful. He was brave. He was valiant. He was bold. He was tough. He was strong. He was larger than life. He had power. And power is so powerful. Power is so infectious. Power is and he walked around and people noticed him. People respected him. He pulled up in his chariot and people stopped and stared. He had proven himself. It says that through him the Lord had given victory. In other words, historians at that time say he had given them victory over Israel. Actually, this was that he had maybe actually been the one who had pulled the arrow and shot the king of Israel and given them victory. And so he was a man who was admired and respected by all. He was a public figure. Even the king was indebted to him because of his valor and bravery. This was no wimpy guy. This was a tough guy. He had killed. He had shed blood. He had walked over bodies. He had climbed over bodies to get to the top. This was a tough dude. This wasn't your wimpy guy crying in the corner. This was a guy who had it all. He was at the peak and pinnacle of his career. He was somebody that everybody wanted to be like, or to be with. But he had leprosy, we read. But just when everything in his life seems to be going perfect, a but comes in. Why does a but have to butt its way in when life seems to be going okay? Have you found that? Everything in life starts to come together. Everything in life starts to fall into place. You get the job you want, to meet the person you want to marry. You get the promotion you want. You get out of debt. You get the new car. And then a but butts its way in and ruins it all. A but butts its way in and upsets it all. A but butts its way in and suddenly your world is turned upside down. A relative gets sick. You discover that you have an illness. Something comes out. Something from your past emerges. Something happens. You have an accident. You go bankrupt. It's just something happens and a but butts its way in and tarnishes and taints and spoils and ruins everything that you've lived for and worked for. Naaman had a hidden issue, and it was leprosy. He had a hidden issue, a skin condition. It must have been at the earliest stages, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to hide it. He wouldn't have been able to discharge his duties. He probably came home one night from battle, from walking the streets patrolling, and he was in his private room and he took off the thick armor and the brass boots that covered him and protected him. And he maybe noticed a little blemish on his skin, nothing much, but as soon as he saw it, he knew exactly what it was. But he could keep it covered. He could keep it covered as long as he kept wearing the armor, as long as he didn't tell anyone, as long as he didn't allow it to become visible. Over time, his joints probably began to get painful and he would have to fight through it. He was this man of contradictions. He had huge success and yet he was starting to experience the secret suffering. He was a man of contrasts, a man who was popular and yet he was experiencing this hidden pain. And life is like that. we can be experiencing these contradictions, these contrasts both at the same time, where one part of our life is going really well. Your career's going really well. But another part of your life's falling apart. You see, life isn't ups and downs, and I say this often, it's not ups and downs. People say, oh, we've all got the ups and downs. I think it's more like two train tracks. And you can have one train track where really good things happen, and one train track running beside it with really difficult, challenging things happening at the same time. And you're trying to somehow manage the tension between them both. It was the best of times, and it was the worst of times. But he could hide it. He could hide it for now. But ultimately, he knew that this hidden issue was going to spread. And it was going to destroy him. He had to keep it hidden. He had to keep it covered up. He had to keep it secret. Why? Because if it was exposed, he would lose everything. And he had too much to lose. He would be ostracized. He would be isolated, because that's what they did with lepers. He would be put on his own. He would lose his job. He would have to leave his family. He would lose his reputation. He would be no longer the general, the captain. He would be the leper that people avoided, not the one who people wanted to be with. How often do we hide things because we're afraid of the cost of people seeing what's really going on? I was watching an interview this week with a pastor in the States called Keon Henderson, and he talked about how he was raised by a single mother, and he was very involved in the church. In fact, he was basically the pastor's servant boy. Whatever the pastor needed, he got the pastor water. But he longed through his whole childhood for a father figure, and he so admired this great leader, this great charismatic leader in his church. And one day there was a father and son's day at his school, and obviously he was on his own. And he came home that day. He was 12 years old, he said. And he came home and he said, Mommy, it's the first time he'd ever asked. He said, Mommy, who's my daddy? And his mommy looked at him and said, it's our pastor. Now, that's not going to happen here. Don't worry, don't be looking at them. Believe me. But even, and he went and met with him and talked with him, but his dad could never admit. And he had other children to his wife, but this child, Keon, had been born out of an affair. And he always talked about how proud he was of his children, and every time he did that, Keon thought, but I'm your child. Are you not proud of me? And later on in life, on his deathbed, they reconciled. And he said to his dad, why did you never do it? Why did you never admit I was your son? And even at the funeral, he had to sit with strangers, and the family were over here. But his dad said this. His dad said, son, I had too much to lose. I would have lost my church. I would have lost my wife. I would have lost my income. I would have lost my reputation. I would have lost everything. And he says, I understood. Keon said, I understood. But it didn't change the pain. This man here, Naaman, had so much to lose. He had what everyone wanted: gifts, ability, accomplishments, fame, reputation. But the problem was he had a hidden issue, and that was leprosy. Only he knew the truth of what was going on in his life. But he had leprosy. You know, we all have a but. And I know what I said. We all have a but. You have a but. I have a but. We all have those things, but. I'm doing well in my job, but I'm not doing well over here. I'm healthy, but I've messed up in my relationships. I'm excelling and getting promoted in work, but my marriage is falling apart. We all have that but in our lives, and we cover it with our armor. We cover it in whichever way we can to stop people seeing us, because we can function at a high level. We can put our best selves out there. We can show the world an image and a perception of us that they want to see and that they expect to see, and we hide our but. We hide the thing that is our greatest weakness. We hide the issue that ultimately will bring us down. But when we're alone, when we're in private, when the armor comes off, when we're lying in bed at night, in our quieter moments when there's nobody else around, that's when we become so conscious of the but in our lives. The thing that's eating away at us, the habit that's destroying us, the way that's of relating to others that's damaging our relationships, the compulsions that we can't seem to control, the hidden hurt that's dragging us down, the paralyzing fears that keep us awake at night. You see, for Naaman, as long as he could keep winning his public battles, he wouldn't have to confront his hidden vulnerability. He was victorious and yet he was vulnerable. But as long as he could stay victorious publicly, he could keep his vulnerabilities hidden privately. I wonder what the armor is that you cover your leprosy with, your but, your struggle, your secret. What external strengths do you put out there for people to see so that they can't see your internal weaknesses? Maybe it's success at work, sports ability, musical talent, natural charisma and giftedness. Make people laugh. You're the life and soul of the party. Maybe it's sarcasm. Maybe it's just the way you connect with people. You're the life and soul. Maybe it's leadership in the church or in the community. Maybe it's your looks. Maybe it's your clothes. Maybe it's your cars. You're using all your abilities to hide the deficiencies. You're winning all your public visible battles, but you're losing all your private hidden ones. And here's what can eventually happen. The thing that you're most gifted at, the thing that gives you success, the thing that people admire you for, can actually be the thing that stops you getting healed, stops you getting help, stops you being vulnerable enough to admit that you need somebody to help you. Yet if it doesn't change, it's all going to unravel and fall apart. I've experienced something of this. And some of you know a little bit of this story. I've shared bits of it before. But 3.5 years ago, we were leading probably the fastest growing church in the Republic of Ireland at the time. One of the probably top 5 largest churches in the Republic of Ireland at the time. We were seeing healings, we were seeing miracles, we were seeing incredible things happen. We would have millionaires and drug addicts sitting beside each other. People were packing in. We'd cleared a balcony and put 200 seats in the balcony just to create more space. We were packing them in, and on the outside we looked like we had it all. We looked like we were the most successful, happy family. And yet, inside I was dying. Inside I was empty. Inside there was something that was really quite broken. I was tired. And I mean, I'm not talking at a late night tired. I'm talking tired. Like all the time tired. And I felt nothing. I was numb. I had no passion, no zeal, no enthusiasm for life. And yet I got up on a Sunday and I preached a storm and I rallied the troops and I spoke faith and I prayed with people and I did all that. And nobody knew the hidden issue except those closest to me. Everybody else saw the facade, they saw the image, they saw what they wanted to see and what I thought they needed me to be. But inside, I was empty. I was covering my butt with my preaching and leadership and public victories and successes. And I don't know, maybe it's a male thing. I can't speak for the women in here, but I don't like to admit when something wrong with me. Like, I would rather almost die than admit that I'm sick. Like, some of you men know what it's like. Like, you'd almost, like if your arm's hanging off, you'll find a way to duct tape it or super glue it back on before you'll go to the doctor. That's kind of what I'm like. And I was the guy that everybody else went to help for. I was the guy who who gave advice. I was the guy who prayed with everyone, and I couldn't admit that I had a hidden issue. And then it reached a peak or a valley. And I remember there was a Monday in 2015 in October where I called a health centre and managed to get a cancellation with a doctor, and I managed to get a cancellation for 5 o'clock that afternoon, and I thought I can sneak in here and nobody will know me. And I remember sitting in the waiting room at 5 to 5 with tears running down my cheeks, thinking to myself, this is not how I thought things would turn out. We'd moved to Dublin with all these dreams and hopes, and we'd seen God do great things, but here I was, empty and not know where to turn. And I went quietly and secretly to this doctor, and I walked in and he looked at my name, and I wanted to be anonymous, and he looked at my name and he went, "You're the minister of the church up the road there, aren't you?" He said, "I've heard about you." He said, "Now what's wrong?" And in that moment all I wanted to do was tell him I had a fungal toenail and get out of there. But that would have had to be one nasty toenail, because the look in my face and the tears in my eyes gave it away. And that day he slept, and it turned out, in a country where 0.5% of people are Christians, this guy was a Christian. And a Church of Ireland. The two don't always go together down there, or up here. And he said, "Craig," he could see I was starting to fill up. He said, "Craig, it's okay." He said, "You're my last appointment. Take as long as you want." And that day began a journey of restoration and healing and wholeness that took a sabbatical and took another year up in the Causeway Coast Vineyard. But I had to admit I had a hidden issue. I had to take my armor off. I had to show my spots. I had to take away the victories and show the vulnerability. I had to show my secrets. Where's the gap in your life between the image and the reality? The image is this, but the reality is this. What's in that gap, and what are you using to fill it? Because if you don't find a way to win the battles inside, you simply can't keep winning the outside ones. What's the struggle that you're hiding? What's the leprosy? Maybe you're succeeding at your job, but you're completely miserable, and you hate Sunday night because you hate Monday to Friday. But you're doing really well, and you're making a lot of money. Maybe your work colleagues respect you, but your wife can't stand you. Maybe you're there for everyone else who needs you, but your family always takes second place. Maybe you're incredibly creative, but you're also incredibly critical and cynical. Maybe you're achieving lots in different areas of your life, but you're constantly battling with anger. Maybe you're really good socially, but you're really struggling sexually. Perhaps you're nice to people who can do something for you, who you want something from, but you take out your frustrations on the people you live with who love you the most. And deep down, all the success and achievement and accomplishment and all the shiny things in your life are just skin deep. And you know it, and you know at any moment it can unravel. And it's an insecure and a very vulnerable place. And that's where we find Naaman in this story today. Let's keep reading verses 2 to 3. Now bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel. And she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of leprosy." You see, he had hidden it from everybody out there, but those closest to him could see it. The people in his home, his wife, their maidservant, they knew what was going on because he took off his armor in front of them. And maybe it's the same with you. Maybe out there everyone can see a certain perception of you, but the people at home see the real you. Your wife, your husband, your kids, your parents, your best friends. They see who you are without the armor, and they still love you, but they see the real you that others don't see. They love you but they're not so enamored with your public victories because they bear the brunt of your private struggles. And this servant girl, she was the complete opposite of Naaman. He was powerful. She was powerless. She was a slave. She was a woman. She had no voice in that society. We don't even find out her name. She was basically kidnapped from Israel and brought here. She had absolutely no power whatsoever. He was a national hero. She was an insignificant immigrant. And yet, the person who Naaman would least have expected to be able to help him was able to offer a solution to his deepest need. But why should she? He had kidnapped her from her family. Why doesn't she just let him rot? That would seem to be the thing to do. You see, character isn't shown when people are nice to you. Character is shown when people mistreat you and how you treat them when you have a chance to get revenge. And she says to him, there's a guy in Israel called Elisha. And if only Naaman would go and see him, he could be healed. She had a solution even though she was insignificant. Even though she was a nobody. And I want to say to you, maybe you feel insignificant, maybe you feel like you're nobody, but you have a solution that somebody else needs. You're an answer to somebody's problem. God, she hadn't chosen to be there, but maybe God positioned her there for this purpose. What she saw as a problem was actually there for a purpose. And maybe what you see in your life as a problem has a purpose because somebody needs what you have. Somebody needs what you have been through. Let's jump down to verse 9. We don't have time to read the whole passage. So Naaman reaches the place that I reached 3.5 years ago in Dublin. He can't hide it anymore. He has to do something about it. So he gathers his entourage. He gets them all in their dark windowed jeeps. All right, maybe camels and horses. But he's a big deal, and he heads to the house of the king and then the prophet Elisha. He's someone who commands respect everywhere he goes. And so when he gets there, he pulls up and he expects red carpet treatment. He expects a line of people to welcome him. He expects everybody to treat him with respect and attention and lavish hospitality. But look what happens, verse 10. Elisha sent a messenger to say to him, "Go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan and your flesh will be restored and you'll be cleansed." Elisha's funny. Elisha doesn't even go out to see him. Elisha sends the intern out, the servant boy out, with a message. Probably in the background, Shania Twain's playing, "That don't impress me much." This big dog rolls up and there's no red carpet. There's a servant boy saying, "Go dip in the river." On the surface, it seems like Elisha's being a bit rude. I mean, we wouldn't put him on our welcome team here. But actually, he knows what he's doing. Because while Naaman's leprosy was the issue he thought he needed to deal with, there was a much deeper issue, and that was his pride. Let me show you what I mean, verses 10 to 12. Elisha sent a messenger to him saying, "Go wash 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored and you'll be cleansed." But Naaman went away angry. Why? He said this, "I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the spot and cure me of my leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed?" So he turned and went off in a rage. Let's think about this. What's he been told to do? Dip yourself in the river 7 times. Was that a hard thing or an easy thing? Easy. He wasn't asking him to spin on his head for 3 days. He wasn't asking him to do somersaults. He wasn't asking him to do something he couldn't do. He was asking him simply to do something. Dip in the river 7 times. Easy thing to do. But on a deeper level, There was nothing more important to Naaman than saving face and being respected. He would almost rather die than be disrespected. He had a reputation to uphold. Look at what he says again. I thought he would come out to me. He thought at least Elisha would come out and show him respect and honor. He was a big deal, and he expected to be treated like a big deal. He had a sense of entitlement. And that can happen when you have power, is that you feel entitled and you feel like people should treat you a certain way. He's a military general, and so who does Elisha think he is? Not even leaving the living room and coming to the front door. Next bit of the verse, and stand and call in the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the spot and cure me of my leprosy. He wanted some big dramatic ritual. He wanted his Benny Hinn moment. He wanted Elisha to take off the white robe and go and the spot to disappear and everybody to see this big dramatic miracle. He wanted something exciting. He wanted a story to go back with because he was a hero, and heroes have big stories. Look at what else he says. Are not Abana and far for the rivers of Damascus better than all the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash there? He starts to get racist. You see, when you're disrespected, it brings out the worst in you. When you're attacked, it brings out the worst in you. He says, our rivers are much nicer than their stinking rivers. If I wanted to dip in a river, I could have done that at home, not in the stinking Jordan. And actually, in one sense, he's right, because the Jordan is dirty. If you were here for the Israel meeting that we had a few weeks ago, put up the next picture there with Paul Reed in the Jordan. That's Paul Reed and Jeff Lucas trying to do baptisms in the Jordan. But look at Paul's face. He looks like he's enjoying every second of it, doesn't he? That's the Jordan River. I don't know what you think about when you think about the Jordan. I used to picture this beautiful blue glistening river. That's the Jordan. I'm not getting baptized in that for much. It's muddy, it's dirty, it's filthy. And so in one sense, Naaman is right. He wanted he wanted him to wave his hands over him. He says this, I thought that. Look at this. I thought that he would wave his hand over me and do some. He had assumptions and presuppositions about how he would be healed. He expected something dramatic and instead he's told to go and dip 7 times in the river. Like, that's so ordinary, it's so simple, it's so practical, it's so undramatic. Just go and dip in the river, but could you not just do something just so people hear, just for show? It was too ordinary. You know, sometimes God will offend our minds to reveal our hearts. And I can't help but wonder how many of us sometimes miss a miracle because it doesn't happen in the way we thought it should happen. We expected some big dramatic miracle, and it's actually really simple and ordinary. It doesn't look like we expected. It comes in a form or through a person that we never thought it could. You see, sometimes in the Gospels, Jesus says this, what do you want me to do for you? But here's what he never says. How do you want me to do it? And sometimes we come to God and we tell him what we want him to do, but we also tell him how we want him to do it. And it's in a way that makes us look good. And God says, you will not dictate to me. I will work in your life, but I will do it in my way, and I will do it in ordinary ways or dramatic ways. The miracle can be right in front of you. But sometimes you don't see the miracle because you're so busy telling God what you want him to do and how you want him to do it, that you're completely missing what he's actually doing because it's not how you think it ought to be done. It's not packaged in pretty paper. It's through the prayers of somebody that you think God could never use them. There's nothing worse than being healed by somebody that you don't even like. Somebody prays for you and you don't even like them and you get better and you have to go and say thank you. God does that sometimes. You go to hear a preacher you don't like, and it's as if he's been watching you all week because it's a word exactly for you, and you're thinking, but I don't even like him. Half of you are thinking, I know the feeling right now. The other half of you I like. It's not as dramatic or exciting. You're expecting to fall over like everybody else in the meeting, and you're sitting there, and that used to happen to me. I'd be in meetings and there'd be 300 people and 299 would be on the ground and I'd be standing looking around them. And yet God can do as much when you're standing up as when you're on the floor. Sometimes God's purpose will override our plans. I need to finish up here. Don't try and control how God shows up in your life. Don't try and dictate the method God uses. Thank God he places people around us who can talk some sense into us when we're stubborn and stupid. Look at verses 13 and 14 as we finish up here. Naaman's servants went to him and said, my father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? So he's about to strop off in a huff, and the servants stop him and say, look, if he had told you to do some big thing, you'd have done it. How much more when he tells you wash and be cleansed? So he went down. That's a key phrase. He went down. He went down. He went down. That was God's goal. He went down. He went down from Syria to Israel. He went down from the king to Elisha. He went down from Elisha to the servant. He went down from the servant to the river. This man full of pride, God kept bringing him down. As the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored, and he became clean like that of a young boy. I wonder how it happened. He dipped 7 times. I wonder how it happened. I wonder after he dipped once, did a little bit of the flesh get restored? Second time, a bit more. I don't think that's how it happened. I think he dipped 6 times and nothing happened at all. And after the second time, he was like, this isn't working. Third time, oh, may as well go home. Fourth time, that is it. And the guys are going, look, just give it 3 more goes, Naaman. Come on, you've come this far. And the 7th time, he gets completely healed. You see, this miracle was more about obedience to what God was telling him to do than it was about anything else. It was about his pride and ego going to one side and him obeying the simple thing God had told him to do. And some of us are stuck where we are because we will not do the one thing God has told us to do. And we're frustrated and we're wondering why life isn't working and why things are falling apart and why we can't get anywhere and why we're making no progress. And it's because we will not do the one thing God has told us to do. And God is not going to change his mind. He's not going to come back in 6 months and go, you know what, I've been thinking about it. I was probably wrong. You were right. Let's come up with another plan. You will remain stuck while you will remain disobedient. But as soon as you obey what God tells you to do, he will move things. He will shift things. He will find a way through. Most of us are 1 or 2 decisions away from a completely different life, but we don't want to make those decisions. You see, for Naaman, the issue wasn't really his leprosy, it was his pride. It was the hidden issue, underneath the even hidden issue. And for you, you might think that this is the problem, but it's actually this. And until you deal with the roots, stop trying to deal with the fruit. Maybe it's unforgiveness. Maybe it's bitterness. Maybe it's hurt and disappointment and pride and addiction and anger and lust. And until you start to deal with some of those hidden issues, you're constantly trying to deal with the fruit. And God's saying, but I want to get to the root. Naaman was a control freak. He was used to controlling others, and yet he had to give up control. And let me finish here, verse 15. Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. And what happens is he actually goes back to Syria and he builds an altar to the Lord in Syria. And this man who served other gods brings God of Israel, Yahweh, Jehovah, back to a foreign land. You see, the miracle on his skin was a great miracle. The miracle of humility was a great miracle. But the greatest miracle of all took place in his heart. He encountered the true and living God. And I wonder what miracle you need this morning. Mark Marks, who was here recently, has this thing called the miracle question. And he asked people, if God could do one miracle in your life right now, what would it be? I wonder what your answer would be. One miracle. Maybe it's finances, family, health. We'll pray for that. But the greatest miracle of all is that you encounter the true and living God. The greatest miracle of all is that you come into a relationship with Jesus Christ. The greatest miracle of all is that you not only have your body healed, but that you have your heart and your soul healed. Because I know people who can have physical healing, but they still spend eternity without Jesus. And Naaman went away not just with his skin healed, but with his soul healed. And God wants to heal you body and soul and spirit this morning. And as we come to communion, I simply want to ask you this. What is God telling you to do? What's the last thing God told you to do? And are you doing it?